welcome to another episode of Gen Z Pro. Here I'm with Tammy Wong Hulbert. She is an academic associated with the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, and I've invited her today to talk about her art and her work. So could you introduce yourself a little bit more?
Sure. So I'm Tammy, and I'm actually a senior lecturer at RMIT University in the School of Art, and I'm an artist, curator and an academic. As an artist, I trained originally in ceramics, but over the years I've sort of worked more in installation forms of art. But my subject matter and interests has been quite varied. But as a curator, I have been quite involved with contemporary art practices. Very early on in my career, I lived and worked here in Beijing, and actually worked with many contemporary Chinese artists, and have kind of followed through with an interest in that area for most of my career. When I went back to Australia, I still continued to be highly interested in Chinese art and Asian art. And so some of my curation projects have involved cross-cultural dialogue between Australia and China, working with the Chinese Australian diaspora, and also many other types of artists as well.
So you mentioned that you also work as a curator, is that correct? And do you think, as someone that does art curation, what do you really look for when creating and building an exhibition?
That's a good question. It does really depend on what the exhibition is, and I've worked in lots of different contexts. So I have started, working in a not-for-profit gallery that was in Sydney. So projects that we did in that exhibition space was very much about, showcasing lots of different types of contemporary art practices and a diversity of practices, and lots of different age groups of artists, including, emerging artists all the way through to more established artists, and from different cultural backgrounds as well. I was also working at Customs House in Sydney, which is a public City of Sydney heritage building where we had a lot of different exhibitions that related to the city culture. And that was quite varied as well, like the context was very different there. So I worked a lot with Sydney-based artists. A lot of them, sometimes they were photographic artists. There was quite often artists that made big installations, but it was quite varied. But more recently, projects I work on, still working with contemporary artists, but I think I've become a little bit more focused on working specifically with artists from Asian backgrounds. I think because in Australia, being Asian is a minority group, although there is a big Asian population, and I think in the art community, quite often people with Asian backgrounds don't really get much representation.
Right.
And so I've always been an advocate for the diversity in the arts, which has been really important to me always.
I see. And you also said that you are interested in contemporary art, and it's part of your style right now. Can you walk us through your journey when it comes to your style and your method of creating?
Well, I think it's really, I see curating as a platform for representing diversity of voices. So I think it's always really important for that voice to come forward. And as a curator, I don't want to be, speaking for someone else. I want to be able to showcase that person and all those artists. And I think also working in a very collaborative way is really important to me. So that, that as a curator, I'm seeing my role as being able to bring together a lot of different elements, and having the artist's voice central to that process. Right. And quite often it's not a singular curation. I've worked on a lot of collaborative exhibitions with other co-curators, so that's been a big part of the process.
Mm-hmm. And I actually looked into your website, I looked into your works, and I noticed a lot of them have to do with urban spaces, with cities, and also community and society within these urban spaces. So what exactly about this intrigues you?
Well, yes, that I must say that when I lived in Beijing many years ago, I was really fascinated by how the city informed the way people made their art here, and it's really been very interesting, this trip coming back after about 22 years since I lived here. And at the time when I lived here, Beijing was changing so much, and it's so incredible looking out at the view that I'm looking out at now, because none of this existed when I was living here. And so I think just this idea of how cities shape artists and culture really fascinated me, and that got consolidated when I was working for the City of Sydney and for Customs House, and our programming actually was looking at how that urban development really had an impact on the way artists were expressing themselves. And so when it came to doing further research, I became interested in this topic of thinking of the city as a curated space, and thinking of how cities actually inform creative practice. And in particular, I focused on looking at public art practice, and I was very interested in urban art practices, not just public art as monuments and very official types of public art, but I was interested in looking at the way human expression is actually manifested in urban environments. So yeah, that study really kind of looked at that, and it did emanate from my earlier experiences of working in quite different places.
And that was your PhD topic as well, right?
That was my PhD topic.
Wow,
yeah.
Amazing. Next question I have for you is, could you just talk a bit about your influences when it comes to art? I mean, I kind of asked that earlier, but what about, any artists that inspire you, any role models you have in life?
Role models. That's a good one. Well, I think I have lots of role models. I've had lots of amazing people that I've worked with, and I mean, I think my early start, because I grew up in Sydney, and the art scene over there is quite marginal to the rest of society. And I guess I came to Beijing as a very young person, and I'd finished university, and I had a little bit of an understanding of the art scene that was thriving here. But I'd really grown up in a family that was not really that involved in the arts, and so when I came here and found the very interesting art scene and the amazing artists like Sarah Chun, whose studio we're in today, I was really inspired by the energy and the commitment to the arts that I found here. It was like no other experience I'd had up until that point. And I think discovering other artistic Chinese people really was really important for my early development, because I think what I saw in the diaspora community, which often diaspora communities are quite conservative, and arts is a bit of a marginal, it's an unusual occupation to take up.
I would say so, yes.
And so I think when I came here and realised what a thriving scene there was, and there's just such a long artistic tradition in China, thousands of years old, that is, really respected, and that there is actually a role of the artist. I know it's still a bit of a struggle today, but to be involved in that really, I think, gave me the confidence, I think, to have a career in art.
Right, interesting.
Yeah.
And the last question I have for you, it's kind of a question I always ask my guests. If you had to give your best piece of advice to Gen Z, so that's my generation, what would you say?
Best piece of advice.
It's a tough question, I know.
I think being true to yourself is really important, and you know, I think you can, like, I think people should follow their passions and interests, and you know, I know that for some people they feel worried about not taking a secure pathway, but I think if you have an interest, a pure interest in any particular approach to, you know, to a career, but I think it's important, as long as you take it very seriously and that you invest your time in it. I think you can make a career in any direction, as long as you are passionate about it and that you commit to it as well. So I often meet a lot of young Chinese Australian students who are surprised to meet someone like me that has actually always stayed in the arts. And you know, I've worked in quite a lot of different sectors of the arts industry, in publishing and art galleries, and now I'm in the education sector, teaching and teaching arts managers, and you know, I'm still continuing to make exhibitions and art projects, and also writing about art. And I think if you're passionate enough, then you can make a career out of it. And I really encourage young people to actually follow that, but you know that it will be hard. It's not going to be an easy path, but you always have to work hard to establish yourself in something, but not to be limited in thinking that you can only take the safe path, I think is really important.
Right, I think that's some great advice for young people out there. And that is the end of our interview. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you.